Greetings, everyone. We are glad that you're here at MAI's webinar, Writing for Social Justice and Community Development. This is Ramon Rocha welcoming you from Carl Stream, Illinois. Thank you to you, our 28 friends from 12 countries who registered. You can type in your questions using the Q&A or the chat. As Jesus' followers, we are called to be peacemakers, and we are to seek the welfare of the country where God has placed us. How can you be a blessing to society by writing for social justice and for the development of your community? We are so privileged to have Ms. Alice Philip as our speaker today. Alice is currently is leading the communications for development work at Tearfund, UK. She has more than 10 years experience working in communications within the nonprofit or charity sector in the UK, as well as overseas. We're so privileged to have Alice. Alice, welcome, and please take it away.
Thank you, Ramon. Fantastic. Thank you. Let me add my welcome to Ramon's welcome. My name is Alice Philip. I'm currently based in London at charity, working in over 40 countries. And we've been going for 50 years, but we've been doing publishing for 30 years. I've been here for 8 years. And as Ramon said, I now lead our communications for development work. This is the first time I've done a webinar, but I'm really pleased that it's with MAI because I have a huge respect for them as an organization. Back in 2015, a friend invited me to go to Singapore to a publishing conference for Christians. And I wasn't really sure what to expect, but I didn't need to worry because I found a very welcoming group of people, of brothers and sisters from across the world who were immediately felt like family. Some of you might have a similar story. If you've been involved in MAI in any way, then you probably share a passion to see the written word transforming lives, hearts and minds all across the world. So I wanted to start just by telling you a little bit about where the topic of writing and social justice and community development what they mean to me. So I've been writing since I began writing when I was a child. I wrote poems, I wrote plays, I wrote projects at school about penguins and painters. I wrote stories and recipe books. I wrote letters to my pen pals. And later I wrote essays, studying social and political science and development studies. Wherever I worked, I wrote and edited, and I also kept writing poetry in my spare time. Alongside this, another passion grew at that same young age, a passion to help people. Sometimes it was a bit naive, but when I heard that there were people who didn't have houses, or people in prison who hadn't done anything wrong, or countries where you couldn't have another religion from the majority, I wanted to do something about it. So I organized bake sales with my friends, I signed petitions, I acted in plays about the environment, I read books, and I watched films about issues affecting the world. I was that kind of child. So as you can see, writing about issues of development and justice, both those themes run deep in me. So it's a huge privilege to get to speak to you about that today. Hopefully I'm sharing my slides. And moving to the next slide. Yes. Okay. So just to give you a bit of a sense of where we're going to go today, I have put 4 topics: writing to equip, writing to inspire and challenge, writing to process and reflect, and writing to listen. So I'll go through those 4. I'm not an expert in this field, and I'm pretty sure that most of you watching this webinar have a lot of experience working in this space where writing and social justice and community development intersect. I thought it would be a good moment for us to introduce ourselves to each other. So if you're happy to share in the chat, could you tell us your name, where you're from, and what kind of role you play? Are you a writer, an editor, a publisher, or do you work in community development in some way? So I think Ramon will be able to help with reading the things that you write in the chat, but if you could do that now.
Yeah, thank you, Alice. We would like to invite our participants to please type in your name and what is your role. Okay. Crispian is working in publishing. Okay, thank you, Crispian. Chern has recently published a book. Pat is from Malaysia. You work in community development and write occasionally. Yes, and she would love to write more. John Hurst is Innovation Director. Joanne Campbell from South Africa is a fiction writer, but am interested in getting more involved in community-related writing. Excellent, Joanne. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Yes.
Great. Well, I hope that there will be something for everyone in here. These are my reflections on working in this field for a decade, but I am very excited about the conversation that we can have with many of you that already work in different spaces. Okay, so I'm going to start with writing to equip. One of the ways that we can use writing in community development work is by writing resources that equip people to be able to work in this field and to do it well. This is an area which my current work at Tearfund focuses on. We see poverty and injustice as symptoms of the fall. When Adam and Eve sinned, it broke their perfect relationship with God, but it also broke their relationship with each other and with the creation that God had placed them in. At Tearfund, we see 4 broken relationships with ourselves, with God, with each other, and with creation. Our mission at Tearfund, we feel, is to help the church all across the world to play their part in restoring these relationships. We want to see people living in relationship with God and with each other and with the world that God has made. In the Communications for Development department, we produce all sorts of different media, which include written, texts, online and in hard copy, videos, audio for audiences across the world, but mostly in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We always work in 4 languages, in English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese, and then we also work in some other languages. The purpose of our materials is to equip the church to do practically what it's called to do. So let me give you an example, because it's always a bit easier with an example. A church in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, is living in the middle of conflict. There's violence everywhere, with militias at war, peacekeeping forces struggling to hold them at bay, and very high levels of domestic violence. Violence is at every level. At Tearfund, we developed with a partner a resource, a process for men and women to talk through issues of domestic violence. They looked at the Bible and saw what God had to say about the value of men and the value of women. They started in groups just of men and just of women, and at the end of the process, they came together in a community dialogue. And the results were amazing. Domestic violence went down sharply in all the communities where this process had happened. So that's a success. But how then do you take that successful process and take it to new places? That's where people like us come in. We need to write it down. We need to edit it. And then we need to publish it and produce it, print it, put it online so that other people can take it up and reproduce the process. And we have to do it carefully. We have to make sure that the process is correct. We have to make sure that everything is clear. Because if that book is somewhere in the DRC and they don't have any other reference points, they need to be able to do that process well and to honor these communities. That's just one example of a publication that we use here at Tearfund. Another that you can see on the slide is a guide to fundraising. How can we think about fundraising as Christians? Is it wrong to ask for money? How should we think about that money? Who does the money belong to? How do we relate to it? We use Bible studies throughout all of our materials to help people to reflect about God and how he sees these very practical topics. I'd like to ask now the group, what issues do you see in the communities where you are? Are there some issues which are taboo, which you can't talk about in the church? Perhaps you've heard sermons addressing this issue. Perhaps you haven't. So if you could just type maybe some issues. I was talking to Ramon yesterday and he said the first one that came to his mind was corruption. So perhaps in your community it's something different, or there's one that is particularly on your heart. But maybe just if you type issues that come to mind that you might want to see resources around this topic.
We would like to invite you to please type in an issue. Okay, Sean said, women not valued.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good topic.
Yeah.
Crispian's is youth engagement. Joan's lingering racism, unemployment, extreme poverty. Also from Crispian, girls' education. Mitch Alago said mental health. Pat says general perceptions of refugees and undocumented migrants seen as aliens rather than people in need of help.
Wow, what a range of issues just from that short question. So my next question for you is, have you heard any sermons in your church about this topic that you mentioned?
Sean, thank you. Child abuse. Churn is discrimination. Crispian said no, he has not heard a sermon on these issues. Occasionally, Pat said. Okay. I have not, from Sean.
So I think if we asked ourselves, does the Bible have something to say about women's value? Does the Bible have something to say about child abuse? Does the Bible have something to say about corruption, about youth and intergenerational relationships? We would say, yes, the Lord has something to say about everything. But when we look at the kinds of books that we have available as Christians, often we don't cover these topics with the same Christian mind and with the same biblical rigor, some of the other topics. So that is why I'm very passionate about Christian writing for these kinds of topics, because we have a gift from God to give to our fellow believers, but also to the rest of the world, of wisdom of how to tackle some of these huge challenges. I did a whole edition of the magazine that I will tell you about in a second on human trafficking, and people use it who are Christians and not Christians, because God has a lot to say about human trafficking. We looked at the story of Joseph and how he was trafficked and how he experienced that. And we used that to share about the value of the person being trafficked, but also why these things happen and how we can prevent it. So thank you all for engaging in that question. Okay, moving on to the next bit under still the topic of writing to equip. This is Footsteps magazine, which is the magazine which our department produced. It started in 1989, so next month we are going to be 30 years old. And a lady called Isabel had a vision to set up this magazine specifically for Christian development and health workers around the world. The magazine was in simple English and designed for people working in settings with very low resources. This year, we reached our 109th edition, which you will see is on the topic of youth. So maybe our friend who is interested in youth issues might check it out. The magazine has covered topics from water and sanitation to youth human trafficking, maternal health. We've published guides to farming methods. Our most popular article ever is about chicken farming. It's a big range. My watchwords for the magazine are inspiration and information. If it's great information, but it's boring, it's unengaging, it's badly designed, then nobody is going to read it. But if it's inspiring, but actually it's empty of information, then it's not very useful. So I always challenge our editors, every article must be inspiring and informing our audience. In every edition, we have a Bible study. We have many articles aimed at helping churches specifically to use their resources in community development work. And because people value the information in the magazine, we have Christian and non-Christian readers, and many people reproduce the material for their own audiences. If you'd like to sign up, I'll give you details at the end, but I commend it to you as an example of Christians equipping other Christians, but also people outside of the Christian space. It's also one of our main aims to have the authors being from the context that they are writing about. So we encourage local authorship in the same way that MAI does. And I've been very inspired by the way that MAI is committed to that.
Alice, that's a downloadable PDF from your website, the magazine?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we have, all 109 editions are downloadable for free. And you can also sign up to get the email, or you could sign up to get the hard copy, and they're all free. And we also, for people who are in low internet settings, we have them on a USB stick, so you can get all of them on the USB stick as well.
Wonderful.
So lots of different. Yeah, thanks, Ramon.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not going to spend as long on the other topics, as we don't have a lot of time today, and it could be a whole seminar series. But the next topic is writing to inspire and challenge. What books, articles, reports have you read which have inspired you or challenged you? It can be fiction or non-fiction, but I'd like you just to type in the chat if there's something that comes to mind, that some work that you read that inspired you.
Yes, Pat, we will share the link to the newsletter later. I think you need to sign up for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the question is, what book?
The question is what books? Mm-hmm.
Okay. That
Books,
you
articles, reports have you read which inspired you or challenged you in the area of social justice or community development?
Okay. Crispian, a local contextualization examination also. Okay, so is there a specific article that you've read or a book on the issue that challenged you, Crispian?
Well, maybe while we're waiting, I'll tell you about one which I recently was inspired by. So this is actually a film, but it started as a book, and also it was written as a screenplay. So I see the writer in the story. So the film was called The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. And if any have access to Netflix, it is available on there in most regions of the world. And I found it amazing. It's a true story of a boy in Malawi who in the middle of a severe drought, worked out how to build a windmill, which powered a battery, which powered the pump that enabled his family's field to be irrigated. And he really saved a whole community from starvation. And the way that he worked out, he was a very clever boy, but the way that he found out about this process, he was able to have access to a library, and he read books about power generation and electricity. And then he went to the dump and he found all these different wires and he worked out how to do it. It's a beautiful film. It's a film filmed in Malawi. It's got a Nigerian British director. There's whole scenes that are in Chichewa. And I just felt, when I watched this film, regenerated in the work that I was doing. And I was thinking about friends of mine who don't work in this field. If they saw this film, I think that they would also be inspired. I think as Christians, we have so many amazing stories about how God has changed things for people. But we also have a role to play in showing some of the suffering that is happening in the world, in places where things really need healing. And so I wanted to bring this topic of writing for inspiration and challenge, because I think it can be fiction, it can be non-fiction, it could be writing in lots of different ways, but the goal would be to inspire and to challenge people.
I've watched that film as well, Alice. I was so inspired by that film. Yes. So yes, indeed. Yeah, Crispian said he read an article in the Nation's newspaper in Kenya on girls' education. So that's great, Crispian.
Great, yeah. That's a great example because it's a newspaper. So
yes,
of writing as journalism, but journalism is very important. Yeah, thank you.
The name of the film is The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind.
Exactly, yeah. And I'm just going to come out of the full screen for a second, and I think I can show the link, the little episode of it. So please, I should be able to.
Thank you, Pat, for you said stories and poems written by refugees. A young Chin refugee has written. There's no audio though.
There is no audio. I don't know what's happening. We'll keep watching the section. So there's the windmill that he builds. I just took a few extracts from the film, so it's not an official trailer. There's the audio.
This is a true story.
A true story.
Yes, I think it has won some awards too.
Yeah. And the guy, he went on to study in the States, and yeah, he's very inspiring himself. So if you do watch it,
okay.
Only way in, unfortunately, my colleague didn't put it. I asked him to put it in here, but he didn't manage to put it in. So never mind. Okay, we should be on to the next topic. He put it in the end. So writing to process and reflect. So this, I felt, was a really important topic for people who work in social justice and community development. Often there are so many challenging experiences and encounters that we have that actually writing can be a really useful thing to process the things that we see, to process them with God, to reflect on the things that are difficult about working in this kind of work. And certainly I find writing poetry helps me sometimes when I'm seeing things that seem difficult or unjust. So I just wanted to share one of my poems. Can you hear me now? Oh.
Yes, we can hear you.
I don't know what went wrong. Sorry. Okay. So the poem is called Divides. So I'll just read it. Meticulously the pool man cleans water and tiles he will never touch. Forbidden fruits his eyes have seen, glimmer and cool in the long hot day. Effortlessly I will dive in, refreshed by the work of his hands. So I included that because I just wanted to show that actually creative writing, poetry, whatever it is, journaling, ways that we can reflect on injustice are, I think, a really important part of how we can use writing. And for some of you that will resonate, for some of you it will be a bit more distant, but I thought I would share that. Okay, on to our last topic now.
Thank you for sharing your poem, Alice.
You're welcome. So writing to listen. Communication has power. We all, I think, believe that. We probably have also heard the verse in Proverbs 31, 8-9. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy. It's a really important verse. Sometimes people can't speak up for themselves because of their circumstances, and we need to help them by amplifying their stories and taking on some of the risk ourselves. But often, we need to actually help people to find their voices, to use their voices and to find their audiences. That's a big part of how I see MAI's mission. I've called this last section Writing to Listen, but I think I might edit it to say helping others to write so that we can listen to their voices. The temptation in social justice and community development work is to think that we have all the answers, and then to bring these answers to the people that we are trying to help. This can happen when people from the West go to other countries, and we've seen a long and sometimes terrible history of what that can look like. But it can also happen when we assume that people who are illiterate in our communities haven't got anything useful to say, or when people who are disabled come to us and we don't hear what they have to say, or women, or children. Hasn't God given us all unique insights? I remember being at an MAI conference and seeing the first woman in Laos who was a Christian ever to be published. And that was such a privilege to have a woman in Laos who was speaking and we were hearing what she had to say. I think part of MAI's call is to look for missing voices and to encourage them, to give them opportunities, all the opportunities that we can from our places of privilege. We want to hear what they have to say. I love at the MAI conferences when we get to hear from people and places that don't often get heard, particularly not outside their own context. And this is where I see writing as a tool for social change. It's for everyone. It enables voices to be heard that are often closer to the issues and have a much better understanding of what needs to change. They often also have the vision of what God wants to do in that place. So I have a question for you. If you work with people who are living in challenging situations, how do you make sure that you hear their voices? Have you seen them as potential writers? Have you ever done a writing workshop as part of your work? So that's just a question. I don't know if anyone would like to respond to that. What about the potential of writers in those communities?
Yes, so few people have shared earlier. Pat has shared a Facebook page. The book
great.
is Rising Up by James Bowie.
Great.
Okay. Okay, so the question again, Alice, is?
The question is, if you work with people in the community, do you ever see them as potential writers? Have you used writing as a way of listening to what they have to say?
Very good question. Okay.
Okay. Well, oh, somebody has.
Yeah. Pat has a answer. The Chin refugees I work with, many are not literate in English, so they can share their
Yeah.
stories verbally with a
Mhm.
translator. The
Sure.
stories
Well,
are
that,
moving and heart-wrenching,
yeah,
she said.
that's great, Pat. And
Mhm.
just showing how you can be, if writing is not possible, they still have words, and you're using different methods to draw out those stories. So that's
Mhm.
really inspiring.
Sean said, we've encouraged school children to write.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Great, because often that love of writing begins at a young age. So that's fantastic.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, next slide, just to keep us moving. Um, so communications for development, just very briefly, as it's not a term that everyone would be familiar with. It is seen as a two-way process for sharing ideas and knowledge using a range of communication tools and approaches that empower individuals and communities to take action to improve their lives. It involves engaging communities and listening to adults and children as they identify problems, propose solutions, and act upon them. So this description I've for you to think about. It's very jargony, like language just for the sector of development. So I don't like it that much, but it's just to show that this is actually a field that is a secular field as well, that the UN is supportive of, particularly UNICEF do a lot of work in this area. The idea is that communication is two-way, and we must be communicating to people, but also listening. And I think reading is a really powerful way of listening to people. We have all learned a lot about the rest of the world by reading books, I'm sure. So the stories that we might be generating in communities where we're working are stories which can teach us about those people's experience, but it also can help those people to process and think about what they want to see different in their communities. So community development is a field that is growing. It's very interesting, and I'd be happy to connect with anyone who would like to know more about it as a field. I'm trying to encourage the dialogue between Christian writers and people in the secular world who are thinking about communication for development. Okay, we're nearly there. I thought it would be good to leave you with a challenge because, after all, social change doesn't happen without challenge and action. So I hope that you are encouraged, however you are involved in writing, editing, publishing, that you can respond to God's call to restore relationships between people and God, between people and creation. I guess the question is, how can you use your writing in this way? So my challenge is not to go and do it. My challenge is that you would pray one prayer this week to God. One prayer and 5 minutes of listening, whatever that looks like to you. Maybe for some of you, that's reading your Bible. For some of you, it's sitting in silence, in meditation, maybe talking to a trusted friend. But for 5 minutes after you've prayed this prayer, listen to what God has to say. The prayer will be in the notes afterwards, but I will just say it now slowly. And if you want to echo it in your hearts now, do. If you want to take it away and pray it another time. Lord, how can I use my writing or editing or publishing to respond to your call in this area of work? If there is something you want me to do, please speak to me now and during this week. Amen. That's it. That's simple. But I believe that God will speak and that he has not brought you by accident to thinking about this topic more deeply. I hope that what I brought to you today just was a tiny inspiration to think about this area more. And I look forward to connecting with some of you afterwards. And yeah, feel free to email me at this address. Ramon, do we have any time for questions?
Yes, we have a lot of time for questions. Thank you for the challenge and that prayer. Yeah, it opens up a lot of, God telling us exactly how are we going to respond and do action, as you said, because that's inviting really the Holy Spirit to speak to our hearts and minds. Okay, so yeah. Yes, we have. We will share Alice's email address. So that's very kind of Alice to share. Again, can you put that slide again, Alice, on your contact details? So that's alice.philip@tearfund.org. And where do they sign up to receive the magazine?
Yeah, so on the website, learn.tearfund.org.
Okay,
homepage.
Tearfund.org is where you sign up to receive the magazine.
Footsteps
magazine.
Footsteps magazine.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can also, if something goes wrong, just email me and I can make sure that you get the link properly.
Okay. That's 109 issues of the magazine. That's downloadable for free.
That's a lot of reading.
That's a lot of reading. That's a lot of reading. How many years?
30 years, yeah.
30 years, wow.
There's a list there where you can look at all the different issue titles, so you can find something that interests you. And there's also a Bible study section where you can search by different topics of Bible study. So let's say you wanted to find a Bible study about stigma, or a Bible study about HIV, or a Bible study about gender issues. Then you can search according to the issue.
Yes.
In the Bible section website.
Excellent. Thank you. So do you have any question for Alice? It's now time. We have a lot of time for questions. Can you put up the slide on your outline again?
I can.
Yes, writing.
There we are.
No, the slides of the outline. Writing to equip. Yes. Okay. So any questions on the 4 areas that Alice discussed? Writing to equip, writing to inspire and challenge, writing to process and reflect, and writing to listen. I like your writing to listen because that's helping people find their voices. I like that. Very close to what MAI is doing.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, do we have any question from our participants? Sean said, Alice, your words have been powerful and inspiring. Thank you for urging us to pray about God's guidance in bringing restoration. So many needs, and yet how to speak right, that's a challenge. Maybe listen well, tell others, and do it.
Yeah, great, Sean.
Joanne is asking, do you share?
Starting with listening.
Yes. From Joanne, do you share your writing to process and reflect? Example poems, or is just that a personal kind of writing? Do you share it or you?
Yeah, really great question. I think, like a lot of writers, there's always the dilemma: is this writing just for me, or is this writing that will bless other people as well? And I'm on a bit of a journey of trying to work out how much to share. So already today was a brave step of sharing my poem with you, because I don't really have published work. I think sometimes my writing to reflect is just my own journal or things like that. That wouldn't be to share. But I think something more creative, and things like poetry or creative writing of different kinds, can be really important to share with others. So I think it depends, but I'm journeying towards sharing more where I can.
Mm-hmm. And Pat said, I hesitate to write sometimes because the stories are so personal. How do we involve the individuals and get their permission to share their
Yeah,
stories? They may not want to share.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that is an extremely important point, Pat. The story always belongs to the person whose story it is. And so I think that they must always be able to say they don't want the story to be shared anymore. So one example is we do a process called participatory video, where people video their own stories, and then they can on that day to not share it with anyone. It was just for them. Or they can choose to share it with the group that they're doing the process with, or they can choose to share it more widely. And at any time in the future, they can say, no, I don't want to share it that far anymore. And that's a really important principle, that the story is always owned by the person. I think that MAI does a good job at helping people to discover their own authorship. And so actually to help people to know whether they want to put something out into the space, and to also recognize the power dynamic. If we are the ones helping, we can sometimes extract the story, and actually the power dynamic is not equal. So I think that takes a lot of care and a lot of relationship to build trust and make sure that it is actually an equal, that it's a real choice for the person. And different organizations have different policies, and different people have different approaches to trying to work out whether it's appropriate to share and what consent looks like. So there's a website called Ethical Storytelling, which has some very interesting thought-provoking articles about things like consent and portrayal of people. And that's an area I didn't cover today because I was thinking more about us as writers rather than us writing about other people's stories. But I think it's great that you brought it up, because it is a really important part of bringing stories to an audience. So yeah.
Would using pseudonyms help, or changing the name?
Yeah, I think in certain circumstances, security needs that to happen. So it's not appropriate at all for names to be. What I do often in a story is I would say, if it's not necessary to share a lot of detail, then not to share so much detail, because you could put someone in danger even if you don't know. So an article came to me recently to edit, and there was a lot of details where this girl lived, what she does as her profession, what church she went to, her name. And so I just took it back to just a first name. She didn't live in a context where the name was a problem, but all these other details made it a bit too specific.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think where we need to share, then we don't need to share. But that's just probably my editorial choice. But I think it's one that is very important to discuss with other people in your context, people who understand your audience, people who are from that community, to try and establish what is appropriate with pseudonyms or other kind of changing things.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, at Tearfund, pseudonyms where the security context is very serious.
Mm-hmm. From Sean, thank you for sharing that poem. We have felt that divide, been sad about it and yet not spoken to it. Like David's poems in Psalms, reading the written emotions and grieving process identifies the injustice and puts words to it. I think in this too, God will guide in forum and timing for sharing.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the Psalms and Isaiah and Lamentations, where the writers, they don't hold back about how injustice is making them angry, sad, frustrated, and God put that in the Bible. So I think this kind of writing is something that must please him. I don't see much of it in the Christian world, but I see it in the Bible. So maybe we should be doing more of it.
Mm-hmm. Joanne is asking, do you have any resources on teaching people how to tell their own stories?
I don't. MAI, do you?
We will look into our record. I'm sure we have. I
It would
will.
be
I will
great
get
to
back
have
to
some.
you. I will get back to you, Joanne, on how to teaching people how to tell their own stories. So that's like what, writing workshop or simple, yeah,
Yeah, I think a
outlining.
writing workshop would be. Mhm,
Uh-huh.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are definitely techniques which help when we're doing the video work. There are techniques which help people to tell their stories. One thing is about creating a sense of group to start off with. If they're going to tell the story to a group, you don't start with the intense story. You build relationship maybe over a day, a few days, if that's possible. So I think partly making sure that people feel comfortable is really important in helping them to share. And then just making sure that there isn't too much pressure, and that there's aftercare. If obviously if it's a really sensitive topic, then you need to be really prepared for psychological kind of trauma that can emerge. So I think to go quite prepared and to take advice from people who know more about mental health if it's sharing around a difficult topic. If it's something more about sharing about issues in the community, then I think there's probably less, there's always a danger of trauma emerging, but I think there are certain topics which you need kind of special thought and special preparation to encounter. Yeah.
Yeah, Pat is saying that how to get the right questions that lead to a story. So if you have good questions that would lead to the person telling the story, that's helpful, I think.
Yeah, I think that's part of good journalism. I mean, we wouldn't always call it journalism, would we, in a community development context, but it kind of is, because it's about bringing out questions which will bring answers. So open questions, not closed questions, testing it on someone else beforehand, maybe, who isn't in your target group, but who might be able to help you see how the questions flow. That can be a good idea. Yeah, I don't have specific ones because I don't work a lot with bringing out people's stories myself, because we're doing more around equipping. So I might need to interview someone about how did this process actually work? And when you say that you got together, what did that look like? Was there a large group, a small group? Did you do group work, or did you do it in pairs, or was it on your own? So these are the kind of questions that I am asking because I'm trying to find out if this works. But if I was doing more story work, then I think I would be asking quite different questions.
Well, from Joanne, I can teach people how to write fiction, but this is a bit different. Yeah, fiction, writing
Great.
fiction.
I think fiction is a hugely important place where we can explore really deep issues. That's why I included number 2, writing to inspire and challenge. I think fiction has a huge role in this space. How many of us have read a book that is a fictional book, but that has completely churned us up or changed the way we think about something, heard a voice that we've never heard before in our lives? So I think fiction is, yeah, a big part of what can come out of our desire to write for social change.
Thank you. Joanne has written several, in fact, a series of fiction.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's great.
Okay. Any other question from our participants? Okay, I think.
It's been a really lively discussion. Thank you so much for
Yes.
bringing your questions. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Alice, do you can we ask you for any parting words for our any
Any
just
parting words?
yeah.
I think when we put our gifts in God's hands, He uses them, and I'm just encouraged that there are people like you across the world who are saying to God, "Here I am," and not to burn out and not to do too much, but actually just to offer that into His hands and ask what He has for you. And I'm excited to hear the stories that will come out of it. Maybe even at the next Lit World, we can have a stream, Ramon, which is about social justice and community development. That's my parting word.
Mm. Thank you. Yeah, we'll certainly consider that and perhaps put that in the program for the next Lit World that's happening in 2021. Okay, we will send out a news release for that coming soon. We are still negotiating with the host and trying to pin down all the details.
It's exciting.
Yes, so this has been so interesting and thought-provoking from Joanne and challenging. So thanks, Alice and Ramon. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you for
Thanks,
being
guys.
here. Yeah. So thank you, everyone, for participating. It's been a great hour. We've heard very good challenges and inspiring messages from Alice, and the work is cut out for us on what to do next after saying that prayer and listening to the Holy Spirit speak to us. So thank you, Alice. Thank you for your
Thank you,
time,
Ramon.
and thank you for sharing today. Just the last announcement from MAI. If you visited the MAI Facebook page, you may have seen our posts asking our friends to give towards scholarships for African writers to attend Lit Africa. So if you are moved by the Spirit to contribute towards African writers attending the continent-wide training conference, it's happening in November 5 to 7 in Ghana. That's called Lit Africa 2019. Then please go to MAI website litworld.org for more details. Okay. Thank you so much again, Alice, and thank you everyone for joining us. We hope to see you again in next month's MAI webinar. God bless you all, and thank you.